Good morning, and it's really lovely to be able to come and speak to you again. My name's Andrew Davies, part of the leadership here at Acts Church. Well, just to let you all know that this Tuesday we've got an in-person meeting. It's funny, isn't it? We never used to use phrases like that. We used to just say we're going to meet, but now it's an in-person meeting, which is going to be great. So we're going to be meeting at 7:30 at the Acts Centre. And if you can let me know if you're coming so you can book yourself a seat. And I know we have to meet with masks and things, but it is so nice just to see each other and to be able to pray and be together in that way. We're also going to put it on Zoom. So if you're watching, you don't feel like you can come to the building, you can still be part of it and participate, even if you're in West Wales. So it all works for everyone. Well, it's a bank holiday weekend. It's glorious sunshine out there at the moment. I hope it stays like that. So I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. But what a strange time we've just lived through. And I don't know about you, but a time like this can raise many, many questions. Many thoughts go through your mind, and you start thinking about things of what's God's plan in all of this? Has God forgotten the things that he's spoken about? Is any good going to come out of all of this? Maybe you've felt like you've been very productive over the lockdown time. Maybe you feel like during COVID you've been able to do and achieve great things. Maybe you feel like you just haven't done anything. I've sat in meetings where some people have been saying, I've learned this language, or I've done this, or I've done this during this time. And I've kind of sat there and thought, I cleaned out the garage. You can maybe feel like you haven't achieved much. And what about the things that God has spoken to the church? About the things that God has spoken to the church here in Acts, in Tylerstown, and what God has spoken to the church in general, in the nation? Are we going to see these things come about? And so today I want to look at living with what God has spoken, living with the promises of God. Promises. Do you know what? As a dad, sometimes one of the worst things I can hear is when one of my children comes up to me and says, "But Dad, you promised." Because at that moment in time, I feel like, oh dear, I completely forgot that I said I was going to do that. And maybe you've lived with promises. People have said they're going to do this for you or they're going to do that for you, and you've not seen any fruit of this promise. Well, it's really difficult when you're living with things that God has spoken. And this morning I want to look at the story of Joseph and of him living with promise and apparently the favour of God, and yet seeming to go as far away from it as it is possible. So I want to look at a dreamer, a crime, a deception, and a mourning father. So the start of the story, well, it starts in Genesis 37 when Joseph has a dream. Well, first, just go back before that. Just before that, we see that Joseph, when he was born, his father loves him. Oh, he loves him. He's his boy. Oh, I love Joseph. Do you know what, Joseph? You'd look lovely in a flashy coloured coat. Oh, it's going to be beautiful. Do you know what? I'm going to give you this coat so all the other brothers know you're really loved. That's going to help family harmony. And so he gets his coat and gives it to Joseph, and Joseph's wearing this flashy coat. All the other brothers are kind of thinking, I don't like this. I don't particularly like you. I don't like the fact you're the favourite. As a child, as a dad again, we have a running joke in our family, which is, who's the favourite child of the day? Tends to be the one who's done the washing up. But we haven't got any favourites. There's no one that's walking around in a flashy coat to say, hey, I'm the favourite Davis. But here, Jacob, or now Israel, has put on Joseph this coat which says, he's my favourite. Didn't really build for great relationships. But then, not only then God gets onto this. And God gives Joseph a dream. And in this dream, he has a vivid picture of, in the end, really all his brothers coming down and bowing at his feet. So he goes and tells them. Again, not brilliant for family harmony. He says, I had this dream. And he shares it with them, and it made the brothers hate him even more. And then he has another dream. And this dream, all the stars come down and start bowing to him. And he goes and tells his brothers and his dad. And this time his dad says, Joseph, maybe this isn't the best plan. And the brothers hate him. God has spoken to Joseph that there will be a point in his history when all the brothers and his family will come and bow at his feet. He's living with promise. He may not have handled it well. He may not have expressed it brilliantly to his family, but he is living with promise. And then we come to this quite terrible story. And I'm going to just tell you the story. You can find it in Genesis 37. But it starts with his brothers going out and looking after the sheep. The brothers are all gone away and they're looking after the sheep. And they're somewhere near Shechem. And then Joseph's father, Israel, comes to him and says, Joseph, why don't you just go and check on how the brothers are doing? Why don't you go and see them? And so Joseph sets off to find his brothers. It's a nice, loving thing to do. Check they're okay. And so he goes to Shechem and finds that they're not there. So he finds someone else and says, where are the brothers? And they say, oh, the brothers are over here. So he goes walking towards finding the brothers and the sheep. And then as he's walking towards them, the brothers, maybe they catch a glimpse of the flashy coat. But they look and see Joseph coming. And then, rather than say, oh, look, it's Joseph. Isn't that lovely to see Joseph? It's rather, they start thinking, let's kill him. Now, I have family reunions. And I turn up and see my brothers. I hope there's never been a point when my two brothers and my sister have looked and seen Andrew coming and think, he's the youngest, let's kill him. You know, I'm still here, so that hasn't happened. And so they have this plan that they will kill him and then go back and report, oh, well, the animals killed him. And when he turns up, Reuben kind of comes in and says, no, let's not do that. Let's just throw him in the hole. And then his plan was, I'm going to go back later and rescue him. But then when Reuben is away, they see Joseph coming and they hit him, beat him up and throw him down into one of the holes. And then they see the Ishmaelites coming. And the Ishmaelites were tradesmen and they're on their way to Egypt. And so the conversation goes, hey, let's not just get rid of him. We could make some money out of him. And so they sell Joseph, their youngest brother, to the Ishmaelites and sell him into slavery. What a story. And this is a story about living with the promise of God. We think when God speaks, when a promise is given to us, everything just gets easy. That's our hope. That's our plan. We kind of think, well, God said it. It's just going to be la da 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 da. Everything's easy. And you just think it's just going to be easy. Joseph, God speaks to him. There will be a day when your brothers bow down to you. Well, this doesn't look like they're bowing down to him. This looks like they're trying to kill him. And ultimately they sell him. This is as far away from what God has spoken as you could possibly go. And it's amazing how often when God speaks, what happens next doesn't seem to match up to what God has just said. So suddenly you have Joseph, oh, you're all going to bow down to me. Suddenly he's sold into slavery and he's walking every step into Egypt feeling like, I am walking away from my family. How are these promises ever going to be fulfilled? And not only that, the brothers now go back with the ripped coat and they go back and say to the father, oh, your son was killed. He's dead. And you've got then Israel mourning and grieving over the death of his favoured son. This is a horrible story. And yet, every step that Joseph is taking towards Egypt, he is fulfilling the promise that God has given to him. Every step is taking him closer to the moment where that which God has promised will be fulfilled. You think of moments throughout Scripture when God has spoken and made a promise. Let's start with Abraham. Let's look at Abraham. God comes and visits Abraham and says to Abraham, you are going to be the father of many nations. In fact, I'm changing your name to Abraham, which means father of many. He spends most of his life going around saying, hello, my name's father of many nations. People say, oh, lovely. How many children have you got? None. Hello, my name's Abraham, father of many nations. How many children have you got? None. You thought of maybe changing your name to fatherless one or sonless one? You know, it's strange that he carries this promise of God, which I suspect at times felt more like a curse than a blessing. God has said this about me, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And even so, then he tries to make it happen, and we know where that ends up. And then when he's in an old age, and when his wife is even older, suddenly God keeps the promise. Living with promise is painful. Think of David. David, who was a shepherd just looking after the sheep, and one day Samuel turns up and calls David in and anoints him to be king over Israel. You think, yes, good. Here it goes. Easy run. Anointed by God. He's going to be the one who'll be king. Yes, he eventually is. It looks like it starts well. He goes, he kills Goliath. You think, whoa, here we go. And then Saul hates him. And then Saul is chasing him. Isn't it amazing how often you see this? When God speaks and God gives a promise, the enemies of God hate those who carry it. When the church receives the promises that God has given to us, do not be surprised that opposition comes against us. Do not be surprised that those who carry promise are hated by those who are by the enemy of God. Saul chases and David hides in the cave of Adullam, but eventually the promise is fulfilled. Peter, that amazing moment where he suddenly announces to Jesus, you're the Messiah. And Jesus looks at him and says, it's not through flesh and blood that this has been given to you. It's through my spirit. And you're the rock on which I will build my church. In fact, you were Simon, but you will now be known as Peter. And you imagine Peter thinking, oh, yes, here we go, boys, on the rock. Woo! And then, a few minutes later, Jesus is looking at Peter and saying, get behind me, Satan. How far away can you go from what God has just said? But if you want the ultimate promise being fulfilled, think of what happened in the Garden of Eden. When humanity stepped away from God, when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and moved away, and the enemy had come in and taken hold of what that should have been special to make it rubbish. And in the midst of all of this, God says to Satan, there will be someone from the seed of woman will come and will crush you and you'll bruise his ankle. And then Satan is then looking out throughout all eternity, throughout time, watching how's this going to be fulfilled. And eventually, the greatest promise ever given by God is fulfilled on Christmas Day. And what do we have? A pregnant teenager, a virgin pregnant teenager. We have a dumb priest. We have an elderly lady pregnant. We have sheep running around. We've got shepherds very confused. We've got wise men turning up. It is not as we would have expected that promise to be fulfilled, but it was. And so what about us? Well, we are living with promise. You and me live with promises that God has given to us. And at times we have to battle for those promises. We have to remind ourselves of the promises. You think of the promises that have been given to the church here in Acts. Great words that have been spoken. We've talked about how food could be a central core to serving and to bringing a community together into the building. And then you sit and think, yes, Food Bank has been a huge success and massively important at this time of COVID. But at this moment in time, we haven't got a building full of people coming and finding love and care and finding hope. But the building is now ready. But the promise is still to be fulfilled. You think of other things that God has spoken to you, and we have to sometimes remind ourselves it may not feel like that is being fulfilled. Through this lockdown, through COVID, it could feel like we have stepped away from what God was planning. It could feel like, surely, God, this wasn't part of your plan. Surely this isn't you fulfilling your promises in this nation and the nations. But we have no idea. What we do know is as Joseph took every step away from his family and into Egypt, he was actually walking into fulfilling promise. He goes to Egypt, the favour of God's on him, he gets a good job, then he gets into prison, then he comes out of prison, and eventually he ends up as the second most important person there in Egypt, alongside Pharaoh. On top of that, his family come and they bow down at his feet, and he's able to feed his family. He's able to rescue his family. He's able to rescue the people of God. He brings them in, and then there's this period of great time where they're loved and cared for, and then it goes wrong, and then Moses brings them out of slavery back into the promised land. Then Joshua comes and takes the land, and then we see bit by bit which ultimately leads to Christ. Promises are fulfilled. Promises are fulfilled. But I bet Joseph didn't feel like that as he walked into Egypt. And as we have at this moment in time, I don't know how you're feeling, whether you're full of energy to, hey, I'm getting out of lockdown, this is going to be great, or whether you think, yes, I'm a bit nervous, don't quite know how to take this. Every step we take as individuals and as a church is into the promises of God. Bless you, and look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, either in person or on Zoom. See you soon. Bye.